Hey, what is up guys, MKBHD here, and a while back I made a Dear Apple video, basically begging Apple to update the aging Mac Pro. Then a little while after that, I included the Mac Pro in a top 5 most overpriced tech video. And I even did a 5-part video series called the Hackintosh Pro Project, which was basically to create an alternative to the machine that Apple just would not update, the Mac Pro. But here we are in 2013, and of course yesterday at WWDC, Apple finally did it. They finally completely overhauled and redid the Mac Pro. So it's a very mind-blowing machine. So without any further ado, this is the Mac Pro explained. Now, we were first shown the preview or sneak peek of this new Mac Pro at WWDC. It got a lot of oohs and ahs for the crowd because of these weird lines and these weird curves that they were showing on the screen. And we'll get to the design in a second, but obviously it's a redesigned machine completely from the bottom up. This takes almost nothing other than the idea of a workstation spec machine from the previous generation Mac Pro. So it is a Mac Pro, but it's pretty much not based at all on the previous Mac Pro. So one could argue that it's not really actually a Mac Pro, it's just a new Apple desktop that Apple called the Mac Pro to get people to stop asking for a new Mac Pro. But that's not true. This really is a Pro machine. It's a Mac Pro. It doesn't feel like a successor to the very long history of Mac Pros and Power Macs that have that same form factor, but I can tell you that this is definitely a Mac Pro. So the ridiculous specs of this workstation are the easiest way to tell that it is definitely a Mac Pro again, as we have the same workstation grade parts inside. And the most impressive part is that all the internals are 2 to 3 times faster than the previous generation highest end Mac Pro, which was not a slow machine at all. We're looking at dual Xeon CPUs. Of course, dual CPU support is classic for the Mac Pros, and also dual AMD FirePro workstation GPUs. So these are extremely high-end graphics cards, but again, workstation-grade graphics cards. This new Mac Pro also moves from regular SATA SSDs, which is what I'm using in the Hackintosh, to PCI-based storage, and PCI-based storage is very, very fast. If you've seen them already, you know that you can get 1.25 gigabytes per second transfer speeds. So I'm used to 600 or 700 megabytes per second tops with my SATA SSDs. 1.2 gigabytes per second for PCI-based SSDs. This is going to be really, really fast storage. And you also have extremely fast RAM in this new Mac Pro, coming in at 1866 megahertz instead of 1600 megahertz. And lastly, when you flip it around to the back, the new Mac Pro has a much improved I/O array, a whole bunch of new ports that are awesome that the old Mac Pro did not have. So you have 4 USB 3.0 ports, you also have 6 Thunderbolt 2.0 ports, and you also get HDMI and 2 gigabit Ethernet ports thrown in there. So I like that there's HDMI. That's valuable, and we'll talk about that in a second, but definitely a huge I/O improvement. Now, the whole point of a desktop computer is the ability to expand and upgrade it in the future. As parts get better, you can put in better parts into your desktop. Now, when we take a look at Apple's 2013 computer lineup, you'll see that there's pretty much no upgradability in that sense. And for years, the Mac Pro was the last Apple machine that you could upgrade the GPU, the hard drive, the RAM. You could upgrade the previous generation Mac Pro. And now this. The CPUs, the GPUs, the storage, basically all the memory, everything is basically guaranteed soldered to or glued to the circuit board. There is pretty much no expandability. So how do they expect this to be a Pro machine? Apple says Thunderbolt. And that is why there are 6 Thunderbolt 2.0 ports on the back of this new Mac Pro. That's why they have an entire page on the Mac Pro's website dedicated to trying to convince you how awesome Thunderbolt 2.0 is. And that's why they have that line on their site that says that this is the most expandable Mac yet. It's because they want you to believe that Thunderbolt is a way of expansion in the future. Now, don't get me wrong, Thunderbolt is good. I love 20 gigabit per second transfer speeds. I love the daisy chaining ability and everything. That's great. But that means that your storage all now has to be external via those Thunderbolt 2.0 ports, which means your nice, simple-looking Mac Pro setup could go from looking like this to looking a lot more like this, meaning you aren't going to have a very clean setup if you tend to use a lot of storage. You can't even throw a new hard drive in there. You have to use external expansion. If I want to add a 2 terabyte hard drive, I can't just shove it in like I could in any of the previous Mac Pros. You have to use an external storage, which is a bit of a con, I would say. Now, the real head spinners here with this new Mac Pro are the size and the design. The size and the design are the most impressive, very different things about this versus the rest of Apple's lineup and the rest of the computers that exist right now. The size is mind-blowing. Okay, it's 9.9 inches tall by 6.6 inches wide. And that's really small. Okay, the studio monitors I have right here are bigger than the new Mac Pro. In fact, if you want your mind blown, you want to know what matches the size of the new Mac Pro in terms of height and width? the Nexus 10. The Mac Pro is the size of the Nexus 10. Okay? If you have a 10-inch tablet, just hold it up and think about that. It's a Mac Pro. I could punt a Mac Pro across the room. You couldn't even get close to doing that with the old Mac Pros. So the size, yeah, mind-blowing. This tiny design is made possible by what Apple calls a thermal core. Basically, long story short, instead of having individual heat sinks on all the different parts that need to be cooled, like the CPU, the GPU, etc., they have one giant heat sink in the center in the shape of a triangle that all the different parts connect to. So everything cools at once, and all the cool air and warm air radiates out the top through a single fan. It's a neat concept, and it's a great way of eliminating the need for a bunch of different radiators and heat sinks and fans and things like that. Now, the design is another interesting thing, and I happen to think that that's the most interesting part of the Mac Pro. It may not be the prettiest machine in the world. We've seen some hands-on of it at WWDC. They had a single one, but it's a cylinder. So look around your room. You probably have square corners all around your room. You probably have your square computer up against a square wall, and it's probably underneath your desk or up against your desk on a square wall surface. This computer is a cylinder. It's forcing itself to not be up against the wall or in a corner of your room. It's forcing itself to be a round cylinder sitting on your desk, and that's kind of what Apple wants. This is kind of a marketing move to get it on the desks of people who are using it and get it on the desks of all the workstations that happen to start employing them. But the handles that were on top of the old Mac Pro will now come in the form of that little scoop that goes into the top that makes it look like Darth Vader's trash can or something, or R2-D2 for that matter. It's an interesting design. I don't really like the fact that it's glossy. If you saw it at WWDC, the inside is matte black, but when you put the cover on, the trash can looking cover is glossy on the outside. Doesn't look all that pro to me, but I'll probably end up putting some designs on it anyway to make it look a little bit better than that. So that's the Mac Pro. It's got the specs of the future and the design of some weird creation or collaboration. But honestly, it's an interesting machine, and I like the fact that it's so powerful, and it'll have the specs to be able to, according to Apple, edit 4K video while rendering effects in the background while connected to up to 3 4K monitors. That's the specs of the future right there, because that's the setup of the future, editing 4K video on 4K displays. Either way, I can't wait to get my hands on one, and if you can't either, definitely leave a thumbs up on this video below. I can't wait to put this on my desk and actually start to show you guys it in person with some unboxings and reviews and tests and things like that. But until then, definitely subscribe for the upcoming videos and more content that I have on the way. And thank you for watching, and I will talk to you guys in the next video.